everyone. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the Executive Director of the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another in our interview series where we meet leaders and other persons of note in the Hymn Society. And today it's really a pleasure to be welcoming Felicia Patton and Brittney Stephan, both of whom studied at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary, and both of whom studied with Dr. Cynthia Wilson and Dr. Ruth Duck. And we'll hear a little bit more about that later. Currently, Felicia serves as Minister of Music and Contemporary Worship at Kingswood United Methodist Church in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. And Brittney serves as Associate Pastor at First United Methodist Church in Noblesville, Indiana. And so they both have connections to the United Methodist Church, and maybe that's something we could talk about also as well. But anyway, let's get into it. It's really, really great to welcome both of you.
Hi.
So normally I like to start at the beginning, but I think just in your case, I'd love to start where you met each other and how you got to do some work together and kind of become familiar with one another. So either one, please tell us a little bit.
Britt, you want to go?
Sure. I met Felicia when we were both advisees for Dr. Cynthia Wilson. I had just started my first year in my master's degree program, and I was really interested in connecting congregational song and music and worship to a variety of cultures. And so naturally that lended to getting to study with Dr. Duck and Dr. Wilson in a variety of ways. And then I think it was actually in her dining room at the time where we had our first introductory session for our class. And she introduced me to Felicia and showed me some about what Felicia was studying. We were doing two different classes, but had a lot of overlap between them. So we each had our respective projects and areas of focus, but we started to work really closely together, and the rest is history.
Indeed. Felicia, how about you? You want to say a little more about that?
Yeah, I just finished my first degree in sacred music, my master's in sacred music from Garrett. And then I went back to do direct study with Dr. Wilson. So she connected me with Dr. Jones, who is one of the plenary and festival leaders for this upcoming conference. And if you're not registered, you should do so soon, because she is amazing. And so I was doing direct study with her, and she says, "Hey, I have this girl, and can she join our direct study?" And I was like, sure. And then there's Britt. That's where I met her. And I was doing a master's in theological studies, focusing on the music and theology of 5 African-American women from, their origins were from the South, but they had moved north. A good amount of them lived in Chicago, some in the surrounding cities.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about Dr. Cynthia Wilson, because she's a fellow of the Hymn Society as of 2022. When I first joined staff here, she was on the executive committee, so I got to work with her pretty closely and got a sense of the depth of contributions that she has made to this field. I wonder if you could just say a little bit from your own perspective, the kind of influence that she's had on you.
Oh, she knows everybody and everything in a good way. I don't know if she knows everything, but yeah, she is just she's just like a world of information and years of study that she has in her mind and in her being. She's very spirit-filled, and she taught me a lot about the history of African-American music, and as well as the United Methodist Church, because I did not grow up United Methodist. I was what they call Baptist-Costal. And just being up there, I worked at Second Baptist Church in Evanston, and in Evanston, everything is kind of commingled. They have one high school, and everybody knows everybody. So a lot of the ministers came from Garrett. So we got a little bit of theology from the United Methodist Church. And actually, she was the one who got me introduced to the Hymn Society. She gave me a flash drive and she was like, look at this, and we're going like next year. So it's like, okay, we're going.
So did you all come as Lovelace scholars the first time?
I
No?
did, but Brittany went the year before me because you went to Waterloo, right?
Yeah, so I started in 2017 in Waterloo. And then, because by the time I found out about it, it was after all of the deadlines and things had passed. And so then I was encouraged to apply the following year. And then that was, yeah, Felicia and I were both Lovelace scholars that year.
I see. And I do want to go back to earlier life eventually, but I'm just curious about your experience with Dr. Wilson sort of introducing you to the Hymn Society and then coming there to attend the conference, either just to attend or as a Lovelace scholar. I'm particularly interested in the Lovelace scholars experience and what that was like for you.
For me, it was really exciting. I had not really, at that point, thought a lot about what my own voice looked like in terms of congregational song. And kind of echoing some of Felicia's sentiments, I would say that Dr. Wilson has had a profound impact not only on my academic studies, but on my life as a whole. She taught me what it means to think about things beyond the scope of my own familiar, and how to challenge the status quo, ask intentional questions, and really helped me find my own voice in a variety of different ways. And so I think that it was a really nice pairing between the Lovelace scholarship and getting to meet other people who were also studying things similar to what I was interested in, but we all really just bonded that year, I think. And it was a really cool opportunity to get to be a part of something that connected so many different people from so many different areas of study or, faith backgrounds or what have you, for a shared vision and mission.
What about you, Felicia? What was that like for you?
Oh, it's great as an extroverted introvert. Look here.
That explains so much.
Look, the Lord is funny when he gives you gifts. And so it's very good to be able to go to these places and have like point places. Like we have the lunch and we have morning prayer. So even if you're by yourself, you're not by yourself because you kind of have these places, and then you can build a camaraderie with the people who just made it there. And then we have the lunch where we're meeting with past Lovelace scholars. And all of those things help you to feel connected because you kind of have to go through it with them,
Yeah.
especially and since we're going to new cities each year. It just makes it easier. It made the transition easier.
I can see that, and I've never thought about that before, that Lovelace Scholars Program sort of gives people a place to be in a small community within the larger conference, and it's not as threatening that way. It's like, I know myself, you go to a conference, you don't know anybody, and it's like, I feel like I'm just here by myself. So that's a really, really, really interesting point. Okay, so now I do want to go back. So I'd like to hear each of you talk a little bit about how in your own family background, your own growing up, how did you get into the whole thing with church and music and ministry? How did that begin to attract you?
It's your turn, Britt.
Honestly, I mean, I was born in the Methodist church that I grew up in. My mother was born in the Methodist church we grew up in. So it was definitely very integral to our upbringing in Huntington, Indiana. And I was fortunate that when I was growing up, I had Reverend Dr. Marty Lundy as my pastor. And she was really one of my first mentors and really integral in helping to shape my identity. And she was a gifted musician and vocalist. So we had fantastic music and participatory singing and experiences along that. So I really didn't know what it was like not to participate in worship or in singing. And sitting in one of the back pews with my grandmother, who taught me, how to read from the hymnal. I learned how to read, notes on the staff before I learned how to read the words or actually understand what that meant, which is just, I think, speaks to just how ingrained it is in me that I can't really separate myself from a time where congregational singing wasn't a part of my own theological expression of the faith.
Felicia?
So for me, it was very different. Again, so I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and in my neighborhood, we only had storefront churches. Most of the people in my neighborhood came from the south, and my neighborhood was where they started the food lunch program that you see all over the country. It started in Chicago, as far from what I was told, and they would be open for a little bit, the churches, and then something would happen and they were closed. So it's never consistent church community. And my parents weren't very religious. My grandma would take us when she felt like it. And I consistently started to go into church in high school. I had a friend who we had a gospel choir, and in the high school, which was weird for a public school, but they let us keep it because we won awards and stuff. So she got me to go into her church, and after that, I just would go to churches off and on. And then I got back into church music as a profession, I would say, when I went to North Park. They had a music and worship degree that first I was education, and then towards the end I was like, I think I want to switch to understanding why, the theology behind church music, why and what and where and all of that. So that's kind of started my journey with church music.
And did you pursue that in terms of getting involved in serving churches at that point?
Yes, the degree we had, we actually had to serve in a church throughout the time of our degree, and we had to also lead church within the school. So they had like it was like praise and it was like church twice a week because it was a covenant school. So Wednesdays and Saturdays we were responsible for all the music, practicing them, picking the music, meeting with the pastor, and all of that. So it was like real life experience, but we also had to intern at a church as well. And then I ended up being hired at that church after I was done with my degree. And that's how I ended up at Second Baptist.
I see. And Brittney, did you have similar kinds of experiences, like going off to school and getting involved in church leadership and church ministry?
Yes. So from as early as I can remember, we sang in the children's choir. My sister and I did growing up, and I served as an intern at my home congregation starting in the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. So I started when I was 16. A lot of my friends were doing nannying jobs or working, in different places. And I started working at the church, which has really been instrumental in a variety of ways that has shaped my experiences, because not many people can be my age and have 14 years of experience. So I think it definitely has shaped a lot of different things. And that opportunity is really where I would say I had the firsthand view of how congregational singing really functioned in our worship experiences. The pastor let me help pick the songs from week to week based on what the various sermon series were that we were doing and how they worked and how music functioned in the life of worship, which was just a really great foundational experience to have had at such an early age. I often say that a lot of people learn to speak, different languages like French and German and Spanish when they're in middle school and high school. And I took German, but really I learned how to speak United Methodism and the and how all of that worked just because it was so in tune with what I was doing day to day that it just became kind of second nature to me.
So you both have pretty impressive background in terms of involvement in church music and ministry before you arrived at Garrett. And on that night that you gathered in Dr. Wilson's living or dining room, I should say, and you talked about how that experience really changed you in a lot of ways and it affected your lives. And I'm wondering, since you already brought a rich experience to that meeting, I'm wondering, what in your life changed then as a result of your interaction with Dr. Wilson and your education at Garrett and your involvement with each other.
So I tried to leave ministry prior to studying with Dr. Wilson. Plot twist. I was serving a particular place doing ministry that was really not a great fit for me as a person in general, and having just moved to a new city and things like that, it was a pretty isolating experience, and one that had all but convinced me that maybe ministry or the church wasn't a good fit. And so Dr. Wilson happened to also be the dean of students at the time, and so I went into her office and I said to her, I've decided that I, no longer feel that ministry is right for me and I need to drop out of all my classes. And she just ever so gingerly, in her own kind of way, just put her hand on my hand and she said, how about we start with just one? So I dropped a class that year and decided, maybe I can manage this without this other class. I don't know what difference that really made in the grand scope of sequence, but it seemed to make my life more manageable. And I was really in a rough place that semester when I stepped foot into my worship class, which was a prerequisite for my MDiv program that was co-taught by her and then Dr. Duck. And that was really where I felt my own kind of coming home to my own calling, and had that reaffirmation of, oh, you know what? I really, really am called to do this. And just being challenged in different ways to think about things in different parts and places. And so really it grew from that one worship class of me saying, I think I finally found my niche. How do I explore this when there's no specific class with a specific title that states this is what I want to do and this is how I want to do it? And she's the one who helped really shape what those independent study experiences could look like, and really shaped it so that it met what my own gifts and graces were, as well as continuing to challenge me just a lot of it in some ways, and give me a variety of different experiences to work from.
Yeah. How about you, Felicia?
Well, Dr. Wilson has such great discernment. She tends to know what you need before you need it. And there's a joke within the Hymn Society that we always say, well, whatever she says goes. If she tells us to jump, we will jump because it's always for our good. And they're like, no, you don't have to. And it's like, yeah, we do, because we always land on better ground when we listen to her wisdom. For me, she made visible communities that I didn't know exist. I didn't know the Hymn Society existed. It wasn't something that I would have come to on my own. She knows what I need to do without having to say it. She will just, let's take another look at this. And because she can see you and what you're dealing with without having to say so. Now with Dr. Duck, she is hilarious. She's so fun, but she is so wise, and she's always open to new experiences. Like how can we incorporate this? I remember when the Hymn Society had urban doxology there, she was the only one down at the bottom, raising her hands and clapping and dancing along with
I
it.
remember that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she is always she makes sure everyone feels welcome. Dr. Wilson makes sure Dr. Duck makes sure everyone feels welcome and has a space. And Dr. Wilson is always caring and wise. So they're like they both fill in those like spaces for them. They're very much so important to my growth. So she did really tailor our independent study to what we needed as I guess future theologians or theologians. She really tailored it to what we needed. And I took a lot of direct study with some great people, Milner and Seaford. I took a couple of classes with him, direct study, was able to really delve into choral texts and anthems and all of that. So it was great for me.
You know, one of the things that's really striking to me as I listen to you tell your stories is the influence of women in ministry on you, both of you, and how important that has become for, you know, the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Representation matters. First and foremost, I grew up with a woman minister, and it was really only until recently that I discovered I've only also ever worked for women clergy. And obviously, like Dr. Duck and Dr. Wilson are women clergy women. Not like exclusively so in every aspect of things, but it has really shaped my own understanding. And I would say it has given me a different kind of confidence to be able to do what I do, because I've never had to enter a space yet where I am the first one to do blank. I have, worked alongside other women who have kind of charted that territory. And honestly, the church I'm serving now, the senior pastor is also a female, and she had just arrived just months before I got there. So it's new for the congregation, but still, for me to get to experience it alongside someone else who just gets a different part of you than sometimes you're able to really articulate for yourself, I think is really helpful, especially in a field that tends to be, more male centric or male dominated at times. Although I think that is changing. The statistics definitely show changing in demographics in that front. But I think having the support and always having someone you can call, when things get hard or you have questions or you don't know, what the next best thing is. And it's not that they're going to give you the exact answer of what you need to do, but to have that sounding board of someone who understands your core essence, I think is critical.
Are we waiting?
I was going to say, any thoughts, Felicia?
I had the opposite upbringing, I would say. I only had male ministers, so I did not know. I did not see it as a function because I didn't go to the main large churches in African American churches in Chicago. I did not have any experience with women preachers or teachers. They just didn't exist for me. And so Dr. Duck and Dr. Wilson being such forces and leaders within the church as a whole was eye-opening, and I saw the space for it. And I like it opened my world to seeing. Like she introduced me to a lot of leaders, female leaders or women leaders within the church. And so, yeah, that's kind of the change.
Yeah. Earlier on, you talked about us having worked together on some projects, and I wonder if you could say something about some of the things you might have done together, Felicia.
Oh, me and Brittany?
Yeah.
We've pretty much done everything together since we I couldn't even pinpoint. Everything is done together, including our hymn text, our contemporary text. Like if she's writing the text, I'm writing the music, and vice versa. We're editing each other's stuff, and so we're very commingled. Have been because we just happen to be two of two for advisees for Dr. Wilson. So we have that in common. And so yeah, what have we worked on, Britt? That
Oh goodness.
right.
Yeah. I mean, really, usually Felicia is one of my first calls when it's like, hey, there's this thing, or we need you to do blah, blah, blah. And I often joke with Dr. Wilson that she introduced me to one of my best friends, because I think that we do really balance each other out, that our differences complement one another. You won't catch me singing the track for my own hymn, but Felicia has sang every one, so that published that it, yeah, sounds polished in the way I had envisioned it in my mind when I put it on paper. I would say one of the more recent things, we did a lot more, I would say, during COVID too, just because, you know, the world shut down. So I had different types of amounts of time to work and focus on things. And the annual conference in 2020, we had the opportunity to lead a featured session that year. And we discussed what dismantling racism for social change looks like in the context of hymnody and congregational singing. And I think that that's still posted on YouTube if there's folks who are interested in some of those resources and things like that. So I think it really has just varied. We tend to go to similar conferences and events, and there's just enough of our work in life that overlap that it is really fun to get to do a lot of stuff together.
You know, I was the moderator for when you all did that work, that featured session in 2020. And I was just thinking that was less than 2 months after the death of George Floyd. So, I mean, the environment, was very charged. And you spoke directly about racial justice in the church and in church music. And I'm wondering, now here we are more than 3 years later. What do you see as the kind of the issues that most concern us with regards to racial justice in the church and in congregational singing today?
Mm. Mhm.
I think in a lot of ways, some things still haven't changed.
Mhm.
I think we are still fighting for the same rights and for, different voices to be heard. It is still a very white dominated field, and that is still the quote unquote standard of metric that people use for what is considered to be congregational song or hymnody or you name it. We still have hymnals that are published without giving proper recognition to the people who wrote the songs, wrote the tunes, and the collections of works that we are still singing. So I think that, one of the biggest challenges is just to continue to keep that at the forefront, and to be mindful of the songs that we choose for worship, why we're choosing them, and being in conversation with other people and not feeling like we have to go at it alone. That not any one of us understands all there is to know about every other culture or, expression of faith through song. And I think continuing to build community will be our greatest asset, but also our greatest challenge.
Felicia, any thoughts about where we are now?
I think the same thing is happening within contemporary music. It's even more Eurocentric, and I'm a part of a committee with Nelson Cohen about CCLI vetting, and we're picking through songs, and I would say that we're doing a more intentional job with picking more varieties of music, but there is a gap between what is the most popular and every other demographic. The main thing that is put out is Eurocentric, and from some of these mainline churches, well, I don't know if I want to call them mainline, but that almost almost a prosperity ridden, like they're just kind of geared that way, and everything's good and all happiness and there's no trouble. And I think that gets lost to a lot of congregations. And there needs to be some conversation around how do we invite other communities to participate in these systems that we've created to get out to multiple people that makes it feel safe for them. Like, why would they allow you to use their music? How are you going to use it? How are you getting it out? Or do you need to do it only in your way? It makes you comfortable. How much credit are you giving to them? Are you getting the music? Are you getting all the rights because you transcribed it? Do they have to give up part of their publishing? And a lot of communities function whereas their music is not for sale. It just kind of moves around. It's for the church. So how do we do that in a capitalist dominated worship industry?
Well, I guess we can resolve that at the next conference, right? No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, that's a really complex issue. But since you're the conference chair for this coming summer, Felicia, I was wondering how you see the conference planning perhaps playing into all this, and any what can people expect in Atlanta that will help them kind of think through some of these issues?
Well, my focus was we had a unique situation where we had a pandemic, and you can kind of reset. Like, choirs are not the same, praise teams are not the same, leadership has changed. We've lost a lot of great people, but a lot of new music has come out of that, a lot of new text and new ideas for church music. And this is just a chance to sing something new and to open the church up to some new experiences. How do you make people who are not within your that are not from your background, how do you make them feel welcome? How are you utilizing their voices, their histories? Is that really the full church community? So the goal is to expose you to some of the history of the Black church and how varied it is. It's not only gospel. We love Dorsey, but he's not the only one. And there were people there with him at the same time who were publishing music and at the forefront of classical music within the Black church. And I just think we lose some of that. We kind of think of them as unicorns a little bit, and they're not. And it's actually more common for that kind of diversity within the singing style, the playing style, the educational background for a lot of leaders within the Black church. They had to do that. You went to school and you have to play classical music. So even if you play gospel, you kind of mix that together. And we see that in the stylings of like a Richard Smallwood, who led the first, the Julius Johnston Institute. He was the worship leader for the last night, where he's mixing classical and gospel styles intentionally. But when you see it played outside, so often people will go either full gospel or full classical. And he was very intentional about mixing that too. Like it's showing the beauty of both styles. And we see people under him doing the same thing, like Patrick Lundy does the same kind of thing. And also Dorsey's niece, Dr. Lena McLean, who recently passed away, within her own music, classical and gospel, and made one of the most beautiful books of music for school, and had her own studies for the kids that she taught to make sure that she had hand-drawn illustrations. It's just beautiful, along with quizzes, so that her students were well-rounded and not only could sing, but knew the history of music. That was really important.
You mentioned that you first came to Hymn Society conferences in 17 and 18, right?
I don't have no idea what year I came first.
Waterloo and
Year
Los
after Brittney went. What was your first year, Brittney?
17. Yeah.
Okay, so it'll be 18 then. Yeah.
St. Louis, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you've had, more than 5 years experience with the Hymn Society. And I'm just wondering what you see as kind of contributions that the Hymn Society is making right now, or could be making to the church music field today.
Brett, you want to take it?
I definitely think the Hymn Society is on the right track. I would love to see it continue to ask the hard questions, to diversify the expressions of what hymnody means and congregational song and how it functions in different faith communities. I think every year since my year at Waterloo has been a fresh expression of something new and exciting. There have been elements, I think, of each conference that I always leave with of, oh, that was really, a different way of thinking, or, is making the shift to help us think about things in different ways. I think of, the plenary that Mark Charles led, right? And how native expressions of song are really lived out in different experiences and things like that. And, Felicia, I'm getting everything confused in my head. Felicia, spoke to what the upcoming conference can look like, and how, there's some marked differences as well in just who's being invited to the table. And I think continuing to do those things and to think creatively about how song continues to function is definitely exciting to see.
I think expanding what a hymn is has been eye-opening and ever expounded every year. And so I think the Hymn Society is doing an intentional job of exposing or changing our minds to what a hymn is, how it functions, what it looks like in different communities, and even within sub-communities within those communities and those experiences. So that has been great for me. Also, being able to see some new collections, new music, hear from your peers about the things that they have researched and studied, making new connections. The friendships I've made here are just lifelong and just wonderful. And it's almost like a family reunion every year. It's like, what are you doing?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's really true. I'm wondering, when somebody asks you, so what do you mean by a hymn? What do you say?
It depends on the day. At 11:30 on a Sunday, it means something in that blue hymnal. If I am visiting an African American church, that's not what we call high church. There's not necessarily that there are levels to it, but that's high church is more. What's the word for that, Brittany? What do we? It's like more more traditional, in the sense that they stick more to they steer away from gospel, more classically based. So that may mean I am singing any hymn or anything like "It Is Well, My Soul" is a hymn and "Precious Lord" is a hymn. If I go to a newer church, that might be anything before 1985. And it still could be sung in a gospel style, but it wouldn't be the traditional setting or what we think the setting would be. The settings are not the same. They could be led solo, and they can be a cappella, they can be with text, but it's something that the church, for me, it's the historical voice of a church is often the hymn.
Mhm.
So you have to know the church's voice. Any church that I go into, I don't usually change anything for the first couple years. And I'll start mixing it in after the first year, but I really like to know what the history is, what their voice is, what they know, what they gear towards, because that can help me to move them forward and introduce new things, but be intentional about it.
How about you, Brittany? What do you say?
I think Felicia did a good job articulating it. I guess I've been intrigued to see how the word hymn, I mean, first of all, I usually say hymn, Hymn, because
Yeah.
it sounds like a whole lot of other words that we use in day-to-day English.
Yes.
But for me, the roles and responsibilities that I've held in various positions throughout the church change the way that that information is received and how it's portrayed. So at the church I'm currently serving, it means a song out of the United Methodist hymnal. But that's not, the only limit of how we use hymns to, articulate the expression of God, or however we can encourage and enliven congregational song, really, to me, is a hymn. I think it's become increasingly finite. The word itself, I often wonder how helpful it is at times and in different places, just because I think it has a very limited connotation behind it at times of, no, but we've always done it this way. And this is, it's metric. It has to be this, this, and this. And these are the stanzas. So I think just introducing it as a question, but also a conversation is really how I tend to go about it, to get a sense of where people are coming at it from first.
Yeah, when I first came on board here, at the interview, Jeffrey Moore, who was president at the time, said to me, there are two things wrong with our name: him and society. And the words can be a little off-putting, but I'm really struck by this summer's conference theme, "Without Limits," and that those words did come from Felicia. I do remember the meeting where that theme was chosen, and it sort of, to me, matches up with the Hymn Society's working definition of hymn, which I don't think any scholars would hold to, but the way we work it is, if a congregation is singing it, it's a hymn, right? I mean, that's sort of the way we treat it in our events and our so. Anyway, we're coming to the end of our time, and I do want to say thanks to everybody who's been participating from watching. And if you have any questions you want to ask Felicia or Brittany, now's the time to get it in the chat so I can ask before we wrap up. And which brings me to the question I like to ask everyone towards the end, and that is, so what would be your fondest hope for the Hymn Society going forward? And Felicia, how about you first?
I would hope that they continue to be inviting and a space where leaders within all communities can come and share their community's voice. I think I was very touched by last year's conference because we were allowed to hear music in the way that they wanted to present it. It did not have to fit a box. The last session with Leslie Jordan was really nice to hear her mix hymns with newer songs, and have such a cohesive festival.
Mhm.
Like I was really touched by all of the music and the way she used the doxology and was able to relate to all of the members of different backgrounds, and bring us all together. Like it's still hymns even without the organ, although I love the organ, but so I just hope that we keep growing, we keep inviting, we keep allowing space for young theologians and leaders, and making space and listening to their voices. I think would be great.
Sounds good. How about you, Brittany?
For me, I would say my fondest hope is that it can continue to be an intergenerational community that comes together, with the shared purpose of thinking creatively about ways to encourage and promote and enliven congregational song. I think that the Hymn Society is uniquely positioned to be able to offer and foster exposure for people who, may not have that opportunity anywhere else. That oftentimes, our world can be small at times, especially when you're just kind of day in and day out, and you see the same place week after week. To think about things from a larger world view, I think is one of my fondest hopes, and that we can continue to gather and to ask questions and to be a place where we can learn from one another. I think some of my fondest memories is sitting across the table from a variety of different people, some of whom, whose names are printed at the bottom of the hymns that I sing in my church on Sundays. And to get to ask questions and to sit next to them at dinner and to just be people together, and to help each other learn and grow, and ask questions of one another in different ways.
And it sounds like a hymn society without limits, right? Well,
Yeah. Also, lastly, I do think that we bring a lot of humanity to the hymn writers that are still here. And like sometimes when you look at the dusty books in the pews, you think that they're all gone. And in the hymn society, we get to be friendship and peers together, and we get to learn about them and why and where, and it brings the humanness of them. Like they're not just words on a page, they're not just the theology in that specific piece. They are living people with lived experience that we can learn from and we can grow from.
Very well said. Thank you so much. Well, Felicia, Brittney, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, and to people who are going to be watching this. And thanks to all of you who tuned in today. I'm glad to see all of your names. Hope to see you in Atlanta, and in the meantime, keep singing.
And be glad in it. This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice.